Hi folks, welcome back to another video. Hope you're having a good month of May. Today we're talking about 15 TikTok famous books that I have read, so you don't have to, and I'm going to tell you if they are worth it or not worth it in my esteemed opinion. I will be standing for today's video, which is a nice break from sitting all day, but you may see me transition later to a seat. But let's talk about 15 books that are super TikTok famous in the last year, couple of years, continuing into 2024 that I have read or tried to read. There is a DNF in here and I will tell you if I like them or not. Most of them I did actually enjoy, so let's get into it. This is one of the piles, by the way, of the 15 books. Let's work through it. Okay, probably one of the most famous books series on TikTok presently is the ACOTAR series by Sarah J. Maas. ACOTAR is A Court of Thorns and Roses. It's a whole series. I have all the books up there. And they're famous now, but I actually read them 6 years ago when they first came out. And I gotta say that they are worth the hype. Especially the first couple ones in the series. So if you haven't heard of the ACOTAR series, A Court of Thorns and Roses is the first in the series. It is more of a mature young adult fantasy series that has romance and adventure and it's suspense in it. It's like a nice high fantasy. If you don't like high fantasy, then you may not love this one because it is high stakes as well. There's a whole new world and there's a lot of fae, and Sarah J. Maas does a lovely job of explaining the entire world and the world building, so that's really, really lovely. This first one, what really got me into it was described as a retelling of The Beauty and the Beast, and to a large extent it is. It's about our main character, Farah, as she is, really like destitute. Her family's in poverty, so she has to hunt to survive and make sure her family survives, and she ends up killing a beast, for which then she gets in trouble with the fae, and you have her romantic interest in book one, which is Tamlin. And it is definitely spicy, so just keep that in mind, but it is certainly a bit Stockholm Syndrome-y, so which is Beauty and the Beast, right? Let's be real, Beauty and the Beast was a little bit Stockholm Syndrome-y, so I think maybe just be cognizant of that, and I don't know how bothered you are with it, but ACOTAR is certainly worth the hype. I am in the process of rereading the series over the last 6-7 months. I'm just slowly working my way through them. I've read the first couple again, now I'm on the third one, and I still like them just as much. So first one, certainly worth the hype. Okay, next up I have 2 Colleen Hoover books to talk about. One of them worth the hype, the other one not so much. The one that I actually really enjoyed is Verity by Colleen Hoover. This is her thriller, and I just gotta say, if you enjoy thrillers and if you enjoy fast-paced thrillers, you would like this because this book is messed up. It makes for a great thrilling read, and I was a little bit disturbed after this, which is, I think, a feeling that is coveted amongst thriller and psychological thriller readers. I mean, if it didn't leave you a little bit disturbed, was it really a good thriller? Probably not. So, but I will say that this is the only Colleen Hoover I have ever finished reading. I have also gifted this to a couple friends who really enjoy thrillers because I actually really liked it. It's about Lowen. She's our main character, and she is essentially hired to be a ghostwriter for a writer named Verity, who's a really famous fiction writer, and she is incapacitated at the moment, so her firm, I believe, reaches out to Lowen, and so part of her research and part of her wanting to write like Verity, she moves into Verity's house with her husband, and Verity is around. And I'm not going to say more than that because it's important that you go somewhat blind into a thriller, but this was fast-paced, it was very, very thrilling. It certainly left me feeling like, what the heck just happened at the very end, which is great, and I think it's a rare feeling for those who do read a lot of thrillers, so I think this was great. The Colleen Hoover that I did not enjoy was It Ends With Us. It's a super TikTok famous book. It's now also a movie with Blake Lively. and I probably got through 10-15% of it, and I had to put it down. That one was certainly nowhere near worth the hype for me. I felt it was just misguided. There was a lot of triggers in there, and there was a bit of a romanticism for me of the things that should not be romanticized. So I will say It Ends With Us, not my favorite. Not my favorite. I could not get through it. I still have a copy, I believe it's upstairs, and I've kept it in case I change my mind about it and I would like to read it. But that one for me was not worth the hype. Okay, so off to a pretty good start. We have, out of the 15, we have 3 books. We have 2 books that I have really liked, and the third one not so much. And now moving on to number 4 and 5 that have been all over TikTok have been Book Lovers and Beach Read, both by Emily Henry. Now, Beach Read has a huge cult following. Almost everybody loves this. It's huge on BookTube and on TikTok, and I read it and I enjoyed it. This was not the first Emily Henry that I read. The first Emily Henry I read was Book Lovers. And for me, Book Lovers meets the hype a lot more than Beach Read. Beach Read is basically about these 2 characters, January and Augustus, and who one writes romance, the other one writes like really hard-hitting fiction, literary fiction, and so they decide to swap roles. And there's also a lot of like personal development and grief that January is navigating during the process. So this was a good book, but it missed the mark for me in the sense the romance didn't really do much for me. I wasn't too invested in Augustus as a character. I really enjoyed January as a character. There was a lot of depth and nuance to her, but that's kind of where it ended for me. Book Lovers, on the other hand, was phenomenal. It follows Nora Stevens. She's our main character, and our male character is Charlie Lestra. So it's basically about Nora Stevens. She's really just painted as the villain. So, you know, in Devil Wears Prada, you have Meryl Streep, who's the villain. And so in all these seemingly mean leading villainesses that are in society and that are in movies and books, like she's really characterized as that. It's this like mean girl, well, not mean, but as this potentially villainous character, but she just really knows what she wants. And I really loved a love story about a character like that. I thought it was certainly more unique. It brought a fresh perspective to romance for me, and just the relationship between the 2 main characters here was just incredible. It also has a small town setting, but yeah, it's set in the bookish industry like so many of Emily Henry's books. Nora is an agent, I believe, and so is Charlie Lastra. He's an editor, and so they both find themselves in Sunshine Falls, which is this really cute tiny town, and there's a lot of friction. There's a bit of enemies to lovers, but I thought Book Lovers was so much better than Beach Read, but I think these 2 still are worth the hype. This one maybe like a little bit less, and Book Lovers certainly a lot more. I personally think almost all Emily Henrys are worth the hype for me. They're just so good. Okay, book number 6 that has been, my god, all over TikTok and BookTube the last year at least has been The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. This is the series, 3 books. Unfortunately, this one for me was not worth the hype. Jennifer Lynn Barnes is particularly famous amongst, I think, the young adults and the teens. I myself really enjoyed the first book. I have the whole series and I haven't made my way through the series. I still have the 3rd one left. But this book, I'm really sorry to say, but it gave me a headache. It was just so twisty and complicated that I got a headache from reading it and making sense of it and who's who and what's what. And the first book, it was still sustainable. But second, it just felt like she was overcomplicating it for no reason. If you haven't heard of Inheritance Games, it is a YA. Again, sort of like falls more also into, it's like teen YA. The premise is really good. It's about our main character, Her name is Avery. She's just like a nobody, high school student, really broke. One day she basically realizes this like ultra billionaire died and left his entire inheritance to her. And she doesn't know who he is. He didn't leave any to his family, he left it to her, and she has to move into his mansion. And that's the condition, that she has to move into his mansion, live with his entire family. Everybody was so pissed that she got everything and they didn't. And in order for her to get her inheritance, she has to live in that mansion for 1 year. And so this is like a mansion is a labyrinth of puzzles and games, and just really her trying to find like navigate everything. Why did he pick her? There's like a lot of like locked door mysteries, if you know what I mean. In that sense, it was very exciting. There was like a scavenger hunt sort of a feel to this book, which I enjoyed. But like I said, by the second book, it just got so tiresome for me, and I did not even get to the third book, which I had already bought, and I sort of regret that. But is this worth the hype? Perhaps a little bit. I think the premise is lovely. It would have been perfect if this was a standalone, or if even a duology. The fact that it's a trilogy is just mind-blowing to me. But people really do love this, and it's super famous for a reason, in the sense that it's a really, really refreshing premise, and there's so much intrigue and mystery, and it keeps you on the edge of your seat. I would just say that it wasn't necessarily worth the hype for me, unfortunately, but I know it's a really widely loved one. Okay, book number 7 that has been all over TikTok, and that has been Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I have gone on and on and on about this book on this channel, so I will not bore you with the details, but this is worth the hype and so much more. This is a contemporary fiction that reads like a thriller. It is genius. R.F. Kuang is absolutely genius. I think this deserves even more hype than it got. This definitely has a lot of satire and a lot of dark humor. Again, I have spoken a lot about this, but if you haven't heard about this book, it is essentially about two main characters, June Hayward, who is a Caucasian American woman, and you have Athena Liu, she's a Chinese American woman, both friends, both do their Masters of Fine Arts together. When they graduate, Athena finds her books just being at the bestseller list. She has achieved all this fame, Netflix deals, movie deals, and her friend June is jealous of that. Athena, unfortunately, randomly dies, and June decides to steal her unfinished manuscript. She changes her identity, in a sense, to be more racially ambiguous, to really take advantage of the attention that BIPOC authors can receive for bringing BIPOC stories to life, and it unravels from there. If you haven't read this, I would highly recommend this one. Okay, book number 8 on this list is Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. This is also a book that you have heard me speak about quite a bit. This has been so famous on TikTok, and it's a massive one. This is not necessarily YA. This is definitely more contemporary fiction, reads a little bit younger adult, but it's not YA. There's some really complex themes in here. And if you haven't heard of this, I think a lot of people were put off by it because it has the gaming industry in it, but don't let that put you off. This follows our two main characters who are in a sense love each other without necessarily being in love with one another. And you follow their friendship from the 90s to the present day, mid 2000s, or mid 2020s. And Gabrielle Zevin is such a gifted writer. She writes so poetically, so lyrically. Her characters are absolutely lovable. This book absolutely destroyed me. It has definitely some really heartbreaking stuff, so it's quite gut-wrenching in some ways, and it's very impactful too in that sense. But it's a lovely story of love, relationships, friendships, and it's these two friends really coming of age, and takes them into their 30s from when they're teenagers, and you really get to see how their relationship and their friendship evolves as they start a business venture together. And I think it was just so beautifully told, so beautifully written. I have a few other reads by Gabrielle Zevin, and I do plan on getting through those as well, but she is a really famous author, and this book deserves all the hype that it gets. Next up, I have TikTok to thank for introducing this series to me, and that is the Love Hypothesis series by Ali Hazelwood. It blew up on TikTok. I don't think I would have discovered this if it wasn't for Book Talk TikTok, and I absolutely loved Ali Hazelwood. Ali Hazelwood is now one of my auto-buy authors for me. The Love Hypothesis in particular maybe wasn't my top in the series, but it's still very good, and Ali Hazelwood is totally worth the hype. So that's already a spoiler. It's very clear how I feel about this book, but Ali Hazelwood is a scientist and a professor herself, so she writes romances with the leading ladies and the leading characters being based in fields of STEM, and that is just already like such a refreshing take. So you have a lot of conversation too around STEM. I know some people don't like that. I personally really enjoyed it. So I believe in this one, our main character is a PhD candidate in biology, I believe. So there's like a lot of biology on the side. She navigates the world of academia. It's hilarious, very relatable, very spicy. And these female characters are just so relatable. Especially if you have ever been in the academic setting, it's just so relatable. And even if you haven't, still super relatable, because the struggles are really universal, right? Despite of what setting you are in. But it is really nice to see our main characters being in the world of STEM. I will say this was my least favorite, but the series is great. I haven't read fully her 3 novellas, but I'm certainly glad this was hyped, so I read it and I don't regret it. Another romance that I think has been so hyped on TikTok, and it's actually, in my opinion, worth the hype. Maybe not earth-shatteringly so, but it's worth the hype, and that is It Happened One Summer by Tessa Bailey. This is a duology. It's about 2 sisters. This is the first one. It's good. The second one, I didn't really enjoy it, to be honest, but this was such a riot, okay? If you have seen Schitt's Creek, the TV show, and you liked Alexis, this main character really just reminded me of Alexis, and it was so nice to see somebody like Alexis have a happy ending and see that type of character development. This is a small town romance. It's about our main character, Piper. She is an heiress, and she doesn't lose her fortune. Her father has a condition that she has to go live in the small town where he is from, and she finds herself with her sister really trying to navigate this like little fishing village, and she has no idea how to do anything herself, and there's huge character development and growth in there. It's a bit of a stereotypical romance too, where you have this like super manly fisherman guy, and then you have a bit of a helpless damsel in distress, but she's not so much of a helpless damsel. I think that's how she's being perceived, as an airheaded heiress. But I thought this book was a riot. It's a Tessa Bailey, so it's extremely spicy, so if that's not something that you're comfortable with, think twice. But if you're looking for a nice, fun summer romance set in a small town that's a quick read, I think this would be a very good option for that. Okay, we're down to the last 4 books, 2 of which are worth the read and 2 of which are not. So let's talk a little bit about the couple books that unfortunately were not worth the hype for me. The very first one is A Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandana. I know this is so loved on BookTube here, and I'm probably one of the only people who didn't love it so much. It wasn't bad. It was okay. It didn't leave me feeling any specific way. Maybe I just read it at a wrong time, because some people feel like this book is so evocative and they love it. This is a little witchy romance. There's a found family aspect to it. And it's about our main character, Micah Moon. She is a witch, like an undercover witch in hiding. And she's sort of hiding in plain sight. And she's called to this foster home for other young witches to help and school them and train them to manage their powers better. And there she falls in love with, I believe, librarian is our male main interest. And what I liked about it was that there was such a lovely found family aspect to it. There's certainly like a lot of magical realism. It isn't like high fantasy with witches or anything. They're very much just look like us and live like us, except they're witches. And I liked that. It felt very low stakes in that sense. It had a grumpy sunshine romance trope, which is not always my favorite. But more than the romance for me, the found family aspect was really lovely for me. But unfortunately, this book was just that. It was nice. It wasn't worth all this massive hype. There's a second one in the series coming out this fall, which I will be picking up because I do think that there is potential. I love the writing and I like the setting. I just think maybe it just didn't do it for me. So that's that. This is gonna be controversial, but the next book that I actually didn't like, and I'm probably the only person on BookTube to say this, is A Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I love my Greek retellings. I love Madeline Miller's Circe by Madeline Miller is phenomenal, and nobody talks about that book. Song of Achilles was okay. It's about Achilles and his friend Patroclus. It's set in the before and during the Trojan War up until the death of Achilles. I like that it really shows the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus as lovers, because they were known as lovers, and for some reason anywhere you read about them, there's this, any retellings or anywhere you read about it, like there isn't a truthful portrayal of what they were. They were like, they're described as brothers or as best friends, when really like historians have said that they were lovers. And I think I like that she maintained that focus and she didn't erase that part. Perhaps my problem with this was that I have read a lot of Greek retellings from women's perspectives that bring you to question Achilles' character, and was he really this amazing hero of a guy that everybody thinks he is, because he did partake in a lot of questionable stuff, right? With the sacrifice of Iphigenia and just using women as slaves. So I don't know. And these are all retellings, right? Obviously, we don't know what really happened. Some people maybe know, but I don't necessarily know what happened. These are all retellings, but I think I've read enough retellings about Achilles that have made me not see him so much as this perfect hero, godlike character, but more of a flawed man. And I think that perhaps really interfered with my ability to love this book as much as everybody does. I do think in true Madeline Miller fashion, it was nicely written, it was poetic, it was lyrical, it was gut-wrenching. She is so good at tapping into like your emotions as a reader. But sadly, this was not worth the hype for me. It was a good book, I own it, but it was not worth the hype for me. Okay, we're down to the last 2 books of 15 books. If you're still here, give this a thumbs up so I know you're still here. But spoiler alert, I like both of these and I do think they're worth the hype. The first one being Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. This is a high fantasy. Well, it's not focusing. Yeah. This one is a high fantasy but low stakes. I'll be honest, this is worth the hype, but I'm afraid to read the second one. It's called Books and Bone Dust. But if you haven't heard of this, this is an adult fantasy. It's basically about an orc named Viv. She has been trained to be an assassin and be a killer, and she's had it, she's done with that, and she decides to retire to a small town and really just have a life of relaxation. And she decides to open her own coffee shop, and my God, like the descriptions of food and coffee, like it tapped into my senses so well that I could smell the croissants, I could smell the coffee. Like it was so incredibly well written. If you're not too familiar with like the high fantasy characters, you will struggle a little bit like I did. Like there were so many random species of fantasy creatures that were mentioned in here that I just found myself Googling. That did impact my experience, but I don't think it took away from my experience too much. So I will still say this book is worth the hype. It's just such an endearing story of this character finding a new life for herself and all the problems that she encounters along the way and how she overcomes them. And there's a huge found family aspect to this as well. And this was just so feel good. It was so feel good. It was so cozy. And I do think if you have read a lot of high fantasy or you game a lot that includes high fantasy, you probably won't have a problem. But if you're not too familiar with high fantasy, you will probably have an issue just understanding names of characters and like what they're talking about. But I would say don't let that stop you. This book was lovely. And the last book that TikTok introduced to my life, and I'm so glad it did, is Finley Donovan is Killing It by El Cosimano. This is the first one in the series, and it's actually the only one in the series that I have read. I'm a little bit scared to read the following books for the fear that they may not be as good as the first one, but Finley Donovan is hilarious. This is a cozy mystery about a single mom, Finley Donovan. I believe she's a mom of multiple kids, and she is a writer, and she is meeting her agent or somebody in a Panera Bread, talking about the plot for her next book, which is gonna be a thriller. Somebody overhears her and mistakes her for a hitman or hit woman, and decides to hire her to dispose of their husband. And she takes it for the money. And so it's obviously like over the top, like ridiculous, like all cozy mysteries are. But this was so fun. It didn't feel dragged out. It felt compact. It felt to the point. It felt ridiculous, but it's just like enough, the right amount of this is a little bit ridiculous that I'm having a good time, but not so ridiculous that I'm rolling my eyes. But that is also more of a subjective experience. Alright folks, those are the 15 top TikTok books that I have experienced showing up on my recommendations all the time. And that's my take on whether they're worth it or not worth it. That's not bad actually. Most of them I think are worth the hype, which is actually quite reassuring. As always, thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Give this video a like. Make sure you hit subscribe, and I'll see you in my next one.